Greetings. My name is Steve Muhammad, and you're watching the Black Narrative on National Network View. And today we're going to be asking a question: did integration work? And to answer that, or to help answer that question, we have with us a author of a powerful book, and it was an excellent read. Black Integration, a failed social experiment. And we have with us Sister Loray Muhammad, and she is a Bachelor of Arts degree from Queen College, major in sociology and political science with a concentration in international politics, a master's degree in social work from Stony Brook University, and a licensed master's of social work degree from the New York State Department of Education, and a resident of New York and married with children. I would like to greet you, sister, in the greeting words of peace of Assalamu alaikum.
Wonderful.
All praise is due to Allah. And so we want to jump right on into, once again, your powerful book, uh, Black Integration. And I wanted to first read this definition from Wikipedia and get your thoughts on it. And it says racial integration, or simply integration, includes dis- desegregation. In addition to desegregation, integration includes goals such as leveling barriers to association, creating equal opportunity regardless of race, and development of culture that draws on diversity traditions rather than merely bringing, excuse me, hold on for 1 second. Of course, something would pop up as soon as we get going here. Let me read it from here. It says, rather than merely bringing a racial minority into the majority culture, desegregation is largely a legal matter, integration largely a social one. And what are your thoughts on that definition, Sister Lorraine?
The definition doesn't really make a difference because at the end of the day, we were integrating into a hostile environment. The elites decided to integrate us because they were trying to placate us or pacify us when we were going through the civil rights movement of the 1960s. So they decided to implement a legislation of integration. But the elites didn't integrate their schools. They integrated the poor and the middle class schools, and the white people that were in charge of those schools did not want us there. So we walked into a situation of hostility. And not only did the school system hostile, but every institution that we entered where they were in control, they were hostile. They already had the mindset of white supremacy and black inferiority, so they felt it was even insulting to have us in the same location that they were in. And they did everything that they could to sabotage us, whether it was in the school, whether wherever institution that we went into, we met hostility. And as a result, those outcomes in 2020, you can see them right now. That's why we're now sitting around in homeless shelters, the psych wards. We are the lowest performing in the society, not because we don't have the ability to perform, but because of the hostility, because they've decided that you may want to come into my house, but I don't want you here. It's like having an uninvited guest. If somebody shows up and you're giving a dinner party and two couples showed up that you know that you did not want in your household, they're not going to get the same warm greeting or the same hospitality as the people that you invited. So we were uninvited guests and they really did not want us there. So that's the reason, one of the reasons, plus the idea of white supremacy. If you're able to compete on the same level they're able to compete, then that disproves the whole ideology of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm. And so, as we get into this, this book is so powerful because we're often sometimes we're given the spiritual equivalent to why we should separate, but here we're dealing with politics, we're dealing with public policy, we're dealing with legislation, we're dealing with so many social factors, right? That once you read this book, you'll see that you'll understand why you called it a failed social experiment. Um, what prompted you to write this book?
Actually, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because before I came into the Nation of Islam, I studied everything that he had written that I was able to get my hands on. And one of the books said emphatically that integration would not work. So I thought that to be a little curious because I'm saying, well, it's so early in the experiment. How would he know? But he said it with such force, and everything else that I had read that he said had come true. So I had to like put that in the back of my mind. Well, why, it was like a kind of a question that I held on to, even though I came into the mosque and I was, striving to be a good Muslim. So when I finished graduate school, and one day I was talking to my husband about writing a book, and one day he said to me, you should write a book. And so I said, well, you know what? I wanted to know if integration works. So let me do the research and see. So what I basically did, I pulled all of the material, all of the statistics for national, because as I traveled through the nation, I noticed that every time I went into a locale, whether it was North Carolina, whatever state I went into, I would always see my people being let off in handcuffs, all kind of negative media coverage of them, especially in the news. So I knew that there was some issue. I knew New York because I worked in New York. I worked in social services in New York for 30 years. So I already knew the dynamics in New York. So I wanted to see how that played out on a national stage. So now I started pulling in all of these statistics and looking at the statistics, just the raw data. And then I started writing the book based on what I saw in the raw data and my life experience. And I can see that the issue was that this is a program that was never going to work. So I was able to see exactly what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was saying. He was doing the prophecy of it because, of course, at that time, you can't look at something, implementation of anything until years later. They say like 25 years later, 50 years later. At the time of the writing of the book, it had only been like 10 years, maybe 10 years. So now I'm looking at it in 2014, and I can now see the outcomes based on the implementation of the laws that they implemented and seeing how those things worked out and how it worked out, looking at the military, looking at the school system, looking at the hospitals. I looked at everything from birth to death to show how we progressed through their systems or didn't progress through their system. And that's how I looked at the book. It was something that I was challenging myself to see if what he said was in actuality what it would be. Would it pan out? Would integration have worked or not worked? But after I looked at the statistics that I had, it was very obvious that it had not worked.
Absolutely. And so let's go ahead and go through some of the things that you just mentioned, like public policy, healthcare, education, unemployment. We'll go ahead and start with public policy. Is that policy and legislation are basically trumped. They're basically trumped by white supremacy. Policies based on these policies that are made are really based on the need and the desires of the ruling class, and they basically omit really the need of the black man and black woman. So we see, well, I'll let you go right on into it. Name some of the policies that you can name that highlight this point.
See, America is built on free labor. So America is always going to try to maintain a free or near free labor pool. That's why the minimum wage is so low. The minimum wage is just a stipend. It's slavery with a stipend. So by the time you finish paying your bills, which is basically returning the money back to the same people that paid you, you end up with very little. That's why you can work all of your life and end up with basically nothing. Most people who are getting Social Security are only getting $13,000 a year. And there's some actual jobs that you don't even get Social Security. So it's a whole system that just has you running in place. And that's why now that we're going through the COVID shutdown and people are unable to work, you can really see the holes in the system. So people that have always worked full time, they're at risk of losing their housing. They're at risk of losing, have no food. They're not able to take care of their children. And what a lot of people don't know, when you're unemployed, there's a law on the books that they can take your children and move them into foster care. And a lot of
Mm.
people are unaware of this, that they can actually, just based on your unemployment, they can say you can't take care of your children and take them all and put them in foster care. They probably won't do that only because of the large amount of unemployment, but that is a law on the books. So all of the policies that they have written is really written to maintain slavery. So when they move from slavery, they move to Jim Crow, and Jim Crow was basically slavery. So then, when after we started integrating with them, and they see we were making advances, because if you give us equal education, we will do very well, and if we're unobstructed and there's no oppression. So what they started to do, they implemented the law of mass incarceration so that they can sift us into the prison system. Now, the bad thing about mass incarceration is not as though our people went out and started selling drugs. We had a policy where the government decided that we would send all of the jobs out of the country because we don't want to pay minimum wage. So even though the minimum wage is low, we can get free or even lower wages internationally. So they went to all of these countries and they started breaking the laws that they could not do here. So child labor laws were broken. With minimum wage there, I think one of the factories burned down in a foreign country. I believe it was Bangladesh. They were paying the people $35 a month. So they searched the world to find the people who were the most impoverished to continue to exploit their labor. So now you have a situation where all of the factories are now abroad. So then the same president brings in drugs. Ronald Reagan was, it was known, documented that they were bringing drugs into the country. So what's the new job? You're telling me if I don't have a factory job and you're bringing in drugs, that's obviously the new employment. The CIA was, of course, involved in distributing the drugs to urban areas, and they pretty much set people up to go into prison. And so the same people that were selling you the drugs were the same people that were arresting you and sitting in court and testifying against you. That's a policy. This is not something that just happened in New York. This is something that happened in Miami. This is something that happened in Chicago. The mass incarceration or the criminalization of black men and women is playing out right to this very day. So the crack epidemic, even though it happened in the 80s, there's still consequences that's going on right to 2020. Our children went into foster care. Children that go into foster care have a higher rate of being incarcerated as adults. And when you're incarcerated, that means you're not taking care of your children. So you have single parent situations that were exacerbated during the same time. All of the things that you see in our colonies, which are called communities or ghettos, was implemented by the government. So if these governments that we live under are so hostile to our existence, the only way we can solve this issue is to totally separate from them. We need sovereignty in order to ensure the future of black people.
Absolutely. And so one of the things like you talk about is this morphing, really the morphing of these type of laws and legislations, right? So for instance, we have chattel slavery, where here we are working from can't see morning to can't see night for free. And
Mm-hmm.
so what part of that whole system is that the slave master had to pay for the food and the shelter of the slave, right? And so now
Mm-hmm.
you have what they call wage slavery, or like you were saying, minimum wage, right? Where the slave, really the slave, is now has to pay for their own food and their own shelter, but it's so minimal that they can't pay for anything else, right?
Yeah. And so the problem that we're having now that COVID has shut them down, there are certain jurisdictions that said, look, we need you to stay home. But they didn't factor in the consequences of these people not having employment. One of the biggest problems that Americans face is that the people who are dictating policy are so wealthy, they really don't understand the consequences of their policies. So they can tell you to stay home, but how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to clothe my children? How am I going to feed my children? So it's only after the people were sitting home for a few weeks that there were consequences. The only consequences that they're looking at is to Wall Street. They're not interested in the consequences to the middle class and the poor. A lot of the middle class were able to go home and do their jobs from home. Many of the poor people, they have to physically be at their job in order to do their job. And so when you tell them to stay home, you didn't put in any cushion or any policy that would ensure that they would not lose their housing. You didn't put in any policies to ensure that they would have adequate food. And so when you go into the supermarkets now, it's not as crowded as it used to be, but that's because so many people cannot afford to purchase food. So these are the realities that the people who are running the country don't really focus so much about because they're rich. So if I'm a millionaire and a billionaire and I'm establishing policies for poor people, obviously there's going to be problems because I'm looking from my vantage point as a wealthy person and I really can't see what it is to be a boot on the ground. So they're sitting around telling everybody to stay home and now people can't pay their bills and they're not trying to ensure that they have housing. So now they're talking about now a lot of people are going to lose their homes. They're going to lose their job. I mean, they already lost their jobs, but they're going to lose their cars. They're going to lose their ability to take care of their children. And no one thought this thing through. So if you're going to tell somebody to stay home for 2 weeks and they're living from hand to mouth, you got to make sure that there's some kind of ability to make sure that they're not starving in the street. And no one seemed to factor that in.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And then you talk about healthcare, for instance, like low wage or slave wage workers lack health insurance, and that this sets up a plethora of problems. And as you just spoke on infant and maternal mortality, you state that it is more costly to correct a problem than to prevent it. And I think that I don't know if you remember Jesse Jackson was talked about how it costs more to keep a black man in the prison industrial complex than it costs to send him through college. And I remember Dr. Alim said that's the point, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so so for instance, social health care, can you talk, and we already know that infant and maternal mortality rates are so high, but you're saying that this is caused by these policies in healthcare, right?
They've been rationing healthcare forever. If you have insurance, you get healthcare. If you don't have insurance, you don't get healthcare. Now, many years ago, everyone went to the public hospitals. So everybody went to the county hospital. Many of us were born in the county hospital. But as they started as employers started providing private insurance, then they started opening up these private hospitals. So a lot of the money went into the private hospital and not so much money in the public hospital. Some cities are reinvesting in it, but for the most part, a lot of the money went to the private hospitals. Now, when COVID is out now, one of the biggest problems you have is that they never really had enough hospital beds for a pandemic. They had enough hospital beds to treat the people who had insurance because the people who didn't have insurance were not going to get any help anyway. Unless they're able to get Medicare or Medicaid, they're not really going to be serviced. So now you have a situation where people are getting sick and they really don't have the hospital beds because they never planned for so many people to get sick at the same time. So you can see now how their policies have played out to the point where now they can't even address situations that are taking place right now because they were looking at a short-term view. We're only going to rationalize health care to people who have A, B, and C. So if you have X amount of insurance, we're going to take care of you. Everybody else is going to get sick. I mean, or really die because we weren't going to even deal with that group. That group was just off to the side. So now we have a situation where everybody's getting sick. So even if everybody who gets insured gets sick, the hospitals are overrun. They had people who were turned away during COVID to die because they didn't have insurance. So all of these things that they set up are now coming unraveled because they really were not concerned about treating the masses of American people. They always focus on a certain group of people and the other people just sit on the side of the road. And so now it's so painfully obvious that America just didn't focus that. So we make the wealth for the country, but they get the wealth to the rich people and everybody else is on the side. So the people, we're all working, we're all generating wealth. As I had a college professor that said, I don't care how much they pay you, you're worth twice the amount that they're giving you. So we're generating the wealth. And what they're doing is whatever they don't pay you, they keep that as profit for themselves. So you might be making $15 an hour, but you're probably worth 30. So how they enrich themselves is taking over the money that they're not paying the masses and they keep it to themselves. And that's why they are rich and they're going to stay rich because this system is established for them. And we're never, no matter how hard you work, that's just a myth. You're not going to get rich because you're working hard. They tell you that so you'll work hard for them. You'll work hard and they will benefit from your hard work, but you'll probably die. If you're poor now, you'll be poor when you die because this is a system that's not created for the masses of the people to get wealthy and to go off and live in some beautiful country at the end of their retirement. This is this system is established for us to enrich everyone but ourselves, and for us to be born poor and to die poor. And I mean, it's cruel to say it, but that's really the bottom line. So, in order for us to develop as people, we must separate ourselves from the people who are putting these laws into place that keep us poor. So what if we can move ourselves to a separate locale where we can control all of our institutions, we would advance so quickly you would forget all of the things that we experience in this country, because we would accelerate. Our education would be controlled by us. Our health care would be controlled by us. The type of food that we're going to eat are going to be grown and controlled by us. So everything that we need in order to survive as a group of people, we're controlling. So we're going to make sure that we have the best because we want the best for ourselves. When you're dealing with a society that has white supremacy as its ideology and its underpinning, all they concern themselves about is the rich white person. They don't even concern themselves so much with the poor white person. But they certainly don't concern themselves with the non-white people, because as far as they're concerned, they're better. So if you're better than a person, you could treat them any way and you don't think anything about it. White supremacy actually causes them to be psychopaths and sociopaths. That's why they can do certain things to you and don't think that they've done anything wrong, because in their eyes, you're just an animal. You're nothing. Therefore, if I kill you in the street, unless you catch them and you can get them to put them in jail, they don't care, because they don't have that compassion, because that white supremacy makes them think that they can do anything to you, and it's not a problem for them. And if you think I'm making it up, go look up the word psychopath, look up the word sociopath, and then you look at what they've done to us since we've been here since 1555, and you tell me that that's not a correct or label or diagnosis for them.
Yeah, yes, sister, it's absolutely correct. And then when you go through your book, a basic example of that psychopath, for instance, right, is what you talk about with the cesarean sections, right? In your book, you talk about the cesarean sections being given to black women because that limits the number of babies. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then can you talk a little about, still sticking with healthcare, about how that impacts the baby in the future of that individual?
Okay, with the cesarean sections, they were doing the cesarean sections, and women were getting them. But what happens when you have natural birth, you can have as many children as your body permits you to have.
Mm,
If you have a the cesarean section limits your birth. So well, that's what they were telling people. They might have changed it at some point. But they were telling women if you had a cesarean section, you had to have another cesarean section, and you had to have another cesarean section. They only wanted you wouldn't want to have more than three of them. But if you have one cesarean section, you do not have to have another one. You can have a natural birth after that. But they don't always tell us the truth about these things. So it's always best if you can have your baby naturally. Unfortunately, so many of us are having scheduled cesarean sections. I don't know what that is. I don't know if the doctor's recommending that to the person because of their health concerns. But basically, it's always best, unless there's a medical problem. Of course, your doctor has to, advise you one way or the other. If you can have a vaginal delivery, it's always in your best interest.
absolutely. And we did a program with a doula, and one of the things, I mean, there's that's a whole program in and of itself. I mean, because we need doulas, because when we go into these hospitals, we have to understand that just like every institution that you point out in this book is hostile towards the black man and black woman. And so it's important for us, if we can, to have us a doula, or to have us an individual who is there to watch out for that pregnant woman who just gave birth. They, who is tired, who is exhausted, and then that's when they come in and try to push certain things on her. Also, you talk about the COVID-19 coronavirus and the shelter in place, and not only do we have food deserts, but they are shutting down hospitals in black neighborhoods as well. So as you're talking about these hospitals that are still in the community that don't have enough beds, they've taken hospitals out just as they've taken grocery stores out.
They have no concern about the welfare of black and non-white people and poor white people. It's just it's if you look at the policies and you look at how they ill affect us, these are not things that just are happenstance. You
Right.
can think it's not like it just we turned around and everybody ended up in the homeless shelter. There was a situation in the 80s when I was working in Manhattan where they were closing down the single room occupancies and they were building luxury apartments. Now the problem is most people in New York City can't afford a luxury apartment. So they're building apartments that are pretty much lying empty. There's
Mm.
plenty of housing, but we can't afford to pay for the housing. So what happens is you have all of these houses that are being built, no one is sitting in them, and you're sitting on the side of the road with no place to go. So the policies that they implement is all based on capitalism. It's all based on money. And so, because everything is based on money, if you can't afford to buy a commodity, you can't have it. So, if you can't afford housing, you don't have it. If you can't afford to buy food, you don't have it. If you can't afford to buy education, you don't have it. So, all of these things that should be a right of any person who's born, they don't look at it as a right. They look at it as if you can pay for it, you get it. And if you can't pay for it, you can't get it. And it's totally ill affects everyone that's in the capitalist system. But when you talk about giving somebody food stamp or you try to give them anything that will make their burden lighter, they start screaming socialism. And so
Hmm.
we want capitalism, but capitalism is killing people. And you can see right now, people, I mean, where are they going to go? If everybody decides who's living in house, living in an apartment that they are renting, and now you're home because of COVID, if all these landlords start turning everybody into the street, it would be like, I mean, I don't know, it would be, where are we going to, everybody's going to fit under the bridge? I mean, it's
Hmm.
just like mind boggling me for me to even think about letting people starve because they just can't afford to buy food. They rather burn the food than give it away. I'm noticing now that a lot of the farmers are giving their food away or selling it low cost so that they're not burning it. So that's the humanity has come out during COVID. I've seen potato farmers that are giving the food away low cost, selling it at a low cost because they have the benefit of getting some money for their produce and then giving the food to people who can eat it. But if we don't make those type of connections where we can exchange what we do have that we would end up throwing out, burning to the people who need it, then you're burning food that you could be feeding your neighbor with. So I have noticed that on the news that some people are doing that, but we more has to be done to ensure that black people survive. And if we don't come together, if we don't put down our petty differences and do what we need to do, Christian, Muslim, Hebrew, whatever you claim, we all black. It doesn't matter where the boat dropped you off. It doesn't matter if the boat dropped you in Haiti, if it dropped you in the Bahamas, if it dropped you in Jamaica. It doesn't matter if you're down south. It does not matter. We left one shore, we ended up on different ports. So we have to get ourselves together, overcome colonialism and neocolonialism, and we have to work to ensure that our children and our grandchildren survive. And if we are not going to take care of one another, if we're not going to look out for our children, we're going to be extinct.
That's right. That's right. And so we're here with Sister Loray, and we're talking about black integration, a failed social experiment. There we go. A failed social experiment. And one of the things that, when you talked about capitalism, the story has come out that some of these white individuals have made hand over fist during the COVID 19 coronavirus pandemic. They become, richer than rich from this pandemic. But then, like you said, on the flip side, you have the black man and black woman, brown man and black brown woman being these what do they call them, essential workers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
some mocked it and said expendable workers, for real,
Yeah.
and so can you tell us, going into now uh, the educational system, as we all know, is defunct. Really, it's not educating our children to be able to uh, become entrepreneurs, for instance, to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And in many situations, cursive has been taken out. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the educational system and how that sets, once again, that is a policy or a program that is setting our children up, and many say the prison to the school to prison pipeline.
Unfortunately, we've always had two types of education. We have the educations that the children who are going to rule the world receive, and we
Mm,
have the education that the people who are going to do the labor, do the menial jobs are going to receive. Because they don't even have too many jobs that are out in the market now anyway. What they really are doing is pushing us to prison, because if you're in prison, there's a job. So if you couldn't find a job outside, you'll find plenty of work in the prison industrial complex. So that's problematic in the event. But you're not going to get a quality education if I'm saying that you're black and I'm white and I'm better than you. I'm going to make sure that my children have an education and your children do not, because employment is a scarce commodity. So we only have a million jobs. I'm going to make sure that my people are in those millions of jobs. I might hire one or two of you, but at the end of the day, I'm going to educate my children to ensure that they're going to be fitting in those millions of jobs. And I'm going to make sure your children can't fit into those jobs. White supremacy is interwoven into the school system. So the children go to school and they don't see anything worth grasping onto. I remember when I was in school and I was reading Dick, Spot, Jane, and those books, Jane and Sally and Spot, and I think Mike, the new family, Mike, Penny, and Pam might be black, but the first group of white. And the book was so slow. I mean, literally one word was a sentence. I was reading the book and going, I mean, if I would have just followed just that, I would have never learned to read at all. My thing was like, why? I can do math. Why am I sitting here reading this foolishness? But these are the things that we have to deal with when we go to their type of school. Our children are advanced. I'm blessed. I'm watching my grandchildren. These children are absolutely brilliant. And I know my grandchildren ain't no special. Your grandchildren are just as smart as my
trust me.
grandchildren. Your children are just as smart as my children. The problem is when they get them into the school, they don't have a benefit. They don't see the benefit of your children being smart, because there's no place for them to go unless you're going to compete with my child. So when I see
Right.
your child coming in the door and you're going to compete with my child, my job is to make sure that your child never gets the chance to compete with my child. And so they really are killing us in the school system. That's why it's very important that we oversee the education of our children. I remember I was on an education panel, and I don't remember what brother said it, so you could tell me your name. I forgot which one it was. He said the dog don't send their child to the cat school. Why are we sending our children to? We know that they are enemies. Why are we sending them to their schools? Because what they're doing is destroying our children. They're destroying their self-esteem. And so when they come home, they all walk into the school with their head held high, like one of the brothers said. I think it might have been Dr. Wesley, but I'm not sure. And they come out with their heads slumped over because they're being taught that they're unemployment. The only time they talk about us, slavery. That's what you learn in school. You had no contribution to America except for slavery. And even when they discuss slavery, it's only when you start reading the books as an adult that you realize how slavery was really the engine to their capitalist system. They wouldn't have America as you know it without slavery. But they don't even talk about that. They just give you one line: black people were slaves. They don't tell you how Wall Street was built on slavery. They don't talk about insurance, banking, all of the industries that they have, manufacturing, all of that derived from cotton, all the things that we actually built because we were carpenters, we were architects, we were engineers. We have to remember the transatlantic slave trade was a brain drain. If they could have did these things on their own, they would have not have to gone to the expense of moving us from the continent of Africa and bringing us here. But because these skills are the things that they did not have, they had to go find someone who can build their civilization. That was what they did. They brought us here to build their civilization, and then they pretended as though they built it themselves.
Hmm. And so, as we talk about just these different institutions and these different dynamics in this society. I mean, every last single one, sister, every last single one, we're seeing the hand of white supremacy. And at this point in time, I think as a people with the internet and being able to search and being able to do research ourselves, we can we there's no way that we can't understand that it's time to separate and do something for ourselves, and that this system, as you said, the foundation of it, the root of it, is built on white supremacy. And as you said, even in the education, we weren't even taught a third. You know what I'm saying, of our history and how we helped to build this nation, who was brought here. And in some history books, they're now even trying to say that we were brought here to help build America. So this is ridiculous, right? So we thank Allah for the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad as taught by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And let's go into employment. Previously, as we know, fewer black-owned businesses dependent on whites, and this dependency on them really has a detrimental effect on the family. Can you talk a little bit about that? And as you say, why we need to come together, pull our resources, and do for self.
Well, one of the biggest problems we have now is that they're willing to hire the women and not the men. They're willing to educate the women, not the men. And so when they made that decision to slay the male and to feed and to spare the female, that's going to cause an imbalance in your household. So you have situations where the women are working and bringing home the I don't want to say the bacon, but the turkey bacon, and they're the ones who are basically securing their household. They flip the entire situation around. So now, I mean, how can we maintain our families when we are living in a society that's so adverse to the family structure? We have a family structure that is the basis of a civilization. If you don't have a good family structure, you're not going to have a good community. You're not going to have a good nation. We have to have strong family. And if the man is not permitted to take care of his family, and the woman has to do it, and the women don't necessarily want to do it. You got to remember, black women weren't in the liberation movement. That was a European women's conception. We were always here to work. We were forced to work, in fact. They decided they wanted to go out into the workforce. We would like, many of us would like to go home. I'm just being honest. We work because of necessity. And as a matter of fact, I forgot the book that I'm thinking about. If black men had been paid after slavery what their labor was worth, black women could have sat home and we could have reared our children. So the policy was to pay black men as low as they can possibly pay them, so we would have to go out and work. So all of these policies that they implement in America are policies that are hostile to black family. So if they're hostile to your family, they're going to destroy your family. All of these laws that they set up is all about keeping the economy going and the destruction of the black family. Because if your family can function, that's anti-white supremacy. White supremacy says you're going to do A, B, and C, and no more than A, B, and C. Because white supremacy is black oppression. And as long as we're living under them, we will always be oppressed by them. That's why it's imperative for us. If we could pack up and leave tomorrow, everybody should be getting their suitcases together. That's how serious this thing is. Because they don't have anything for us. Their economy is being broken by COVID. Capitalism is dying under COVID. So what kind of job are you going to get after COVID? They can promise you anything. They're all giving you symbolism to give you the impression that they're going to be better than their forebears. They're not going to be any better than their forebears. They want to keep us here to send us off to war. They want to keep us here to make sure we can take care of their grandmothers as home health aides and all these different positions that they do give us. Anytime they're holding us, it's for some agenda that benefits them. They never think about what's benefiting us. And so you have to look at this. This is a 465-year history of exploitation. We have to get past Stockholm Syndrome in order for us to release their legs and walk away. We have to walk away. There's no other way for us to survive. As long as we're staying here, they're always going to find some means of exploitation. They're always going to control every aspect of our lives. So we have to go. God shouldn't have to put so much pressure on us to get us to leave. Just the fact that we've experienced what we've experienced. But some of the problem is that they're very deceitful and they keep our people occupied with the television, with the radio, with all of the filth that they generate through these mediums. That's why they have a lot of these reality TV shows so that you can sit around and watch that stuff. I've never watched most of it, so I don't want to judge all of it, but I'm sure most of it doesn't benefit us in the long
Yeah, just like the music, and we talked on a previous show, you know, you had, for instance, the assassination of black leaders in the '60s, right? And then in the '70s, they come with these black exploitation movies, and they glorify pimping
run.
and drug dealing. Then in the '80s, late '90s, you have the conscious rap, and then they bring in this thug rap,
Yep.
and then some would even say that the conspiracy so-called theory, which is really a conspiracy fact, is that the music industry met with the prison industrial complex, and they come up with this thug rap, right?
Mhm.
Where it talks about killing your own black brother. And so now you bring up this so-called reality, right? TV, and this is just the same thing being played on us over and over again.
All
What
programming, excuse me, all
mhm.
programming on television is telling you what to think. They don't tell you anything other than what to think. So if they decide that China is the enemy, everything on TV is about China. The TV shows are anti-China. Everything is based on the propaganda. The news is propaganda. They don't tell you, they don't educate us enough for us to make analysis and decisions based on what we know. So what they do is just say the same thing over and over and over. So when you're watching NSNBC, they're talking about maybe COVID today. You look at CNN, Trump, 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 and they are telling you what to think. So if you ask a question about Trump, they're going to tell you exactly what they heard on CNN or MSNBC. They have no independent gauge for any information. All the information in America is controlled. So all the media is going to say the same thing. Right now, they're talking about the vaccine. So everybody's trying to convince you now that the vaccine is good, the vaccine is good, the vaccine is good. That is propaganda. That's what I want you to think. So when you go outside, you go, oh, yeah, the vaccine is good. Where did you get that thought from? Do you have any independent research? Do you have any other source other than what you see on television? So everything they want us to do, they put on TV before they want you to do it. And so they
That's
decide
right.
this is the newest trend. It's in the music. It's on the television. And people think that they're doing what they want to do, but they're actually being programmed to do what they're doing.
Hmm. And once again, we thank Allah for the divine guidance of the Honorable
Divine
Minister Louis
guidance.
Farrakhan, because, like you said, that's a torch light, in this dark world. So let's go in. I mean, we talked about employment, and there was something that was on my mind, but it just fleeted away. But hopefully, it'll come back. But with unemployment, we're still the first hired. I mean, the last hired and the
Mm-hmm.
first fired. Right? We're overworked and underpaid. And so
Mm-hmm.
this goes into employment and education. So here we have this college degree education, but we still are making, um, with our college degree and our letters behind our name, the same amount that a white man without letters is making in some situation. And in some situations, he's the boss.
Mm-hmm. I think I worked many years ago for, I think it was the census. And me and the young lady worked together, and I had a year of college, and she was in college. And she was telling me our supervisor was celebrating getting her GED. So that's the kind of things that we deal with when we work with them because white supremacy is the law of the land. Their ethnicity is a credential, and that's what I'll say. So it doesn't matter how much education you have, they can have no problem putting a person in front of you to tell you what to do just based on the fact that they're white. And we can sit all day and talk about different experiences, and everybody I'm sure has at least one where they had someone who was not qualified to supervise them. I mean, whatever the
Right.
job was. But they did a study, I think it was in Long Island, it was a few years back, where they found out that all of the black people and brown people that were hired for telejobs had at least associate's degrees. But the white women that they were hiring, some had college, and some had high school, and some did not. So all they needed was a high school diploma to get the same job that another person had to get an associate's degree to get. And more than likely, they were paid better. So as long as we live in a society that thinks that their people are better just based on their ethnicity, we will never make any advancement. And as far as employment is concerned, they weed us out. They weed us out based on name, your name your parents give you. They weed us out based on your address, your demographics. They can figure out basically that you're black. And even when you get there, when you go to the interview, they can still weed you out. We shouldn't have to be subject to that kind of mindset in 2020. But the only way we're going to get away from that mindset is to get away from the people who implement that type of ideology. So there's really
Right.
no other solution to this problem but for us to separate.
And once again, we're here with Sister Loray Muhammad and her powerful book, Black Integration, a Failed Social Experiment. Sister, before we go on and get to these last few points, tell us how individuals can purchase your book, how they can get in contact with you to interview you about the book, and if you can, if you will, just go right ahead.
Okay. I'm on Twitter. My name is Loray Muhammad. And then once you go into Twitter, you can reach me directly into my website. And then you can just leave your information and reach out to me that way. And I'll contact you. If you're interested in selling books, you can do it for wholesale. And you purchase the book and you'll make a certain amount of money off each book, depending, of course, how many that you purchase. So if you're unemployed and you're a salesperson and you would like to sell books, then just reach out to me on Twitter. You can also reach out to me for interviews at the same website. And as far as
Excellent.
buying the book right now, it's available at Amazon and it's available at Barnes and Noble. And that's it.
Yes, excellent. So let's go ahead and get into this so-called war on drugs, right? And we all know that it was a war on black people. I mean, our whole conversation, black people, aren't we just tired? Ain't enough enough? You know, aren't we sick of tired, literally sick and tired of being sick and tired, right? So
Yeah,
we talk about this. This is all absurd that we're still talking about this as black people. What I mean, sister, you talked about the Stockholm syndrome, right? A lot of us don't know the Stockholm syndrome. Can you break down that Stockholm syndrome? I know. Yeah, can you break that down and maybe even talk about learned helplessness as well?
Stockholm syndrome is basically when you kidnap a person. In order for them to survive, their defense mechanism kicks in. And what they do is they try to please their captors in order to not be abused. Because in order for them to kidnap you, they have to implement a certain amount of brute force and abuse on you. So this you can have Stockholm syndrome just by being kidnapped for a few weeks. A lot of times when they find these people are kidnapped, even for a few weeks, they give them counseling. They try to do something to help them overcome the Stockholm syndrome. Now we've been here for 465 years. So the level of Stockholm syndrome that we have is of course more severe than what a person that would have for a week or two. I always say if I'm straighten them to the point. If you're voting in an election and you're black, you have Stockholm syndrome. If you are running for an elected office, you have Stockholm syndrome. If you think that America, which where you kidnapped too and been held hostage for 465 years, is going to treat you better than they've been treating you, you have Stockholm syndrome. Now, this little space of time between Jim Crow and current, a lot of our people have not experienced some of the brute force that they have implemented against us. But now you start seeing that our people are being hung different places and they're saying that we committed suicide. This is kind of like an eye opener for us because so many of us didn't have pain. And when you don't have that pain, you think that it's going to be all good with your captives. But we have to recognize as captives, we will always be abused by captors. They are perpetrators and we are victims. And we have to recognize that. And it's very difficult for me to watch when white people get on television, all due respect, and try to pretend like they don't know what racism is. These are the programs that you implemented. For you to sit on TV and pretend as though a black person should have to explain to you what racism is when you are the authors of the actual racism is it's really sad. I don't even know why people show up for these type of interviews, other than the fact that they need a job, they're paying them X amount of money, or they're selling something. You know what racism is because you are the implementers of racism. So for you to sit around and pretend that you don't know or you have amnesia as to how we got here is very unfortunate. But we have to teach our people night and day that voting is not going to solve our issues. It can help you on some level, but the only way we can really get free of them is to get free of them. And that's why God is dictating separation. He didn't say try to be here or maybe the master will treat you better, because the master's never going to treat you better. All they can do is manipulate you. So they say, oh, well, we don't do certain things in slavery. Everything that they did to us in slavery, they're doing right now is just changed in how it's being done. They still have access to black women because of poverty. They still have access to black men because of poverty. So all of these things that they did when we were enslaved is still taking place right now. Nothing has changed but the calendar date and how it's being done. So if we're still here, it's involuntary. So you can't say to me, I'm voluntarily doing something when you have me captive in your country. I cannot be a volunteer. I'm a captive. So we have to recognize what's going on, call it what it is, and stop trying to put a nice face on our abuse and mistreatment.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm laughing because a thought comes to mind of what Brother Nori said, and I can't remember what it was, but he was saying something to the effect that we're high tech slaves. You know what I'm saying? We got, you know, this is ridiculous. But anyway, um, and it really is, sister. We as a people, you know, we just can't imagine unless we come into contact with the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as taught by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We can't even imagine the greatness and the potential that is within us, and how we need, as they say, that we have nothing to lose but our chains. Literally, we have nothing to lose but our chains. The Let's go into a little bit of the prison industrial complex, and then we'll go right on into this, as you were talking about the child welfare. You know, this prison industrial complex, I think they say that America has over like 2 million people incarcerated, 25%, something like that, 25% of the population of the earth, or some crazy figures like that. But when we look at the prison industrial complex, one of the blaring things that come to mind is that we see these white people who are out here in Utah or Colorado or places like that, making hand over fist in money for selling weed, basically, right? And we see us still languishing in the prison industrial complex. Can you talk about the prison industrial complex and how it affects the family, how it takes the black man out of the family, and even when he returns, because there are so many, as you were saying, policy and legislation that has been implemented that he can't get a job, he can't get housing. Can you go into all that?
Basically, it's very difficult to have a functioning family without having a male heading the household. The male is very important to the family, and as much as people would try to pretend as though they're insignificant, they're very important. Women learn how to deal with men by having a father in the household. The sons learn how to be a man by having a father in the household. So a woman who's raising her children, you can do it, but it's a certain amount of handicap to it. It's much easier if the male is in the household and can father and parent his child. So when they pull out men out of the community and pull them into the prison industrial complex, it enriches the people who have stock in the prison industrial complex, but it destroys our children. So now our daughters are growing up and they don't know how to really to interact with a man. Our sons are growing up and they don't know how to be a man. So now you have all of this dysfunction that's just in your family. So now you spread that dysfunction throughout the entire community and the entire neighborhood. And you wonder why we have the problems that we have. Children whose fathers grow up incarcerated have a higher rate of being incarcerated themselves. Children who go into foster care have a higher rate of being incarcerated later on in their lives. So all of these things all of these traps they've laid for us is destroying our family structure, and they're being enriched by it. Everything, every system has a monetary connection. Foster care, there's lines for money for foster care. There's people getting paid from foster care. There are people who are getting paid, the prison guards, all of them are getting enriched by the prison industrial complex. The only person that seems to be suffering, the only people are the black man and the brown man and the poor white man who are sucked into these systems, because they're not going to rehabilitate them. They most of the time are going to come out worse. And then the system, the society, the government punishes them for actually being arrested, even if they were wrongfully incarcerated.
And sister, I mean, we're talking about separation, and many people, when you say separation, many people think that number first thing comes to their mind is you hate white people, that it's about hate, but that cheap way of looking at separation. Can you break down really that separation is survival? Number one, it's survival. Number two, if it's done in a timely manner, it can we can avoid a lot of bloodshed that's going to occur, because at some point it's got to be a breaking point. Can you talk about separation?
Separation is in the best interest of both groups. They have no intention on giving us justice. You can see it when you look at the papers and you look at what goes on, the police department, all these things. So they're not going to give us justice. Sooner or later, it's going to explode. It's going to be a powder keg, and it's just going to boom. So we can only take so much pressure in our lives. So all of this pressure that we're experiencing, just racism, everyday racism, and then you have people that think that we should accept more. Just the fact that they choked this man for almost 9 minutes on camera, and they don't think that they had no problem with that. We can't continue to watch this continuously. It's going to have an effect on us, and at some point, it's going to blow. They think they have a right to do these things. We know that they don't have a right to do these things. At some point, we're gonna end up coming to blows, because there's no way to get justice from them if they don't think that they're doing anything wrong. They think what they're doing is totally acceptable. We know it's not acceptable. So at some point, the rubber's gonna meet the road, as they say, and so it's just not good. It's better that we say, okay, we cannot live together with these people in peace. We have to come up with a plan where we're going to move to, and we go and take whatever 8 to 10 states there, and we going to move and live there, because we're never going to ever be able to coexist with them as long as they have the mentality of white supremacy. It's like me thinking that I can get up every day and beat my child up. That is basically their mindset. So they think no matter what they do to us, no matter how they treat us, we should still stay around. And even to this very day, they're doing little symbolic things to try to convince us to stay with them, because they're as dependent on us as we are on them, and which is kind of sick on a level, but that's another story. That's another conversation. So, but basically, we must separate from them. It's just there's no we can spend all day talking about the necessity, but the separation is really for the benefit of both people. If we can't control our food, if we can't control our clothing, if we can't control our education, we're always going to be sitting stockpiled in the homeless shelters, in the jails, on the food line. We are struggling not because of anything that we've done, but with the things that have been done to us. And in order for us to heal, we have to separate. You can't have a person who's traumatized remain with the person who's causing the trauma. That's the first thing they teach you when I'm taking continuing education classes. The first thing you must do is separate from the source of your trauma. We've been here for 465 years experiencing all matter of trauma. In order for us to heal, we must separate from the perpetrator. As long as we're sitting here, they're going to victimize us because that's the relationship. The relationship is prey victim. So we will always be victimized by the predator. And in order for us to heal, we have to separate.
And so, just one more point, and then we'll go ahead and close this on out, right? But I wanted to just, you sparked something, and I wanted to just touch on that, and that is, when you talk about a woman who experiences domestic violence, right? There's no one in that who is looking out for that woman's best welfare that would advise that woman to stay with that man. And and like you said, after a while you have two mentalities that are sick. You have the woman's mentality that's sick for wanting to continue to forgive that man for the beating, and of course he has his whole mentality, a sociopath, right? A psychopath is sick because he takes some type of pleasure in some cases in beating that woman. So separation in that case, we can see it on that smaller level, and we need to begin to understand that it's on a larger level. It's on a macro level in the case of the black man and woman. And so I wanted to end, talking about our children, because if we as a people are not strong enough to stand up for the future of our children, then, as the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, we might as well go commit suicide, right? So, can you talk a little bit about the child welfare system, the foster care system, and if you can, just go ahead and talk and give us an understanding of how messed up that is, and if you want, if you can talk about the crack, because I think people can really begin to understand these dynamics that took place because of the crack epidemic, which was of course the CIA bringing the crack into our communities.
See, the things that they're punishing us for doing, I'm not saying that we don't have issues with, how to, our care of our children can be an issue. But the things that you're punishing us for, the very same things that you implemented against us during slavery. You don't want me to spank my child, but you used to whip us on the post. All of the things that we've experienced here, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the education neglect, all of these things went on for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries. We've never gotten any kind of trauma counseling. So all of these things that we learned here, we can now implement against one another, and we implement within our household. So all of the things that we learn from them now, the society is punishing us for doing what we've learned. So you're saying, well, you shouldn't hit your child, but we've learned over centuries and centuries and centuries, if we didn't do what we were supposed to do anywhere we were, whatever area of the plantation that we were in, we were whipped. So then you learn that behavior that you whip your children because you were whipped. So all of the things that we experience as far as abuse and neglect that the society implemented against us, some of us are doing it in our homes. We also are doing it to one another because these behaviors were never corrected. The trauma was never addressed. Not only was the trauma not addressed, but the people who traumatized us continue to traumatize us daily. So we really never got a chance to heal from any of that. So now a lot of our children are going into foster care basically because of our poverty. You'll find that people who are impoverished at a higher risk of their children going into foster care because everything is a commodity. So if you're telling me I have to buy glasses, I have to buy all of these different things, and my budget is only so much amount of money, whatever it's $100, $200, whatever I'm getting, I'm going to be at higher risk of being pulled into agency, a child protective agency, because I'm going to be neglecting. Like 80% of the cases are usually neglect cases because I didn't do something. And that's how our children come into foster care. Once they're there, because racism is in every system that we interact with, we have a higher rate of our children being placed. There's many cases, I don't want to get into that, that's another discussion. White people can get their children discharged to them faster with the same issues as a black parent who comes into family court with that issue. So there's racism on every level. Now with the crack epidemic, crack hooked people very quickly. So they deteriorated very quickly. So now they are more interested in purchasing drugs than they are in feeding their children. So those children were removed and placed into foster care. Some years later, I think in some states, I know New York, they started letting you put your children in foster care with your family members. So that was a little alleviation of, just put them in with a stranger. But basically, all of these systems who are judging us are the very same systems that put us in a position in the first place, because they sold us the drugs, and the person that sells you the drugs is responsible for the outcome. So if the government decides to sell us drugs and then they turn around and say, okay, you want drugs and snatch your children, God is watching. We can't stay with them.
That's right. That's right. And so let's end it. Let's end it on this. The Kerner Commission. President Lyndon B. Johnson formed an 11-member National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorder in July 1967 to explain the riots that plagued cities each summer since 1964 and to provide recommendations for the future. The commission in 1968, the commission's report in 1968, informally known as the Kerner Report, concluded that the nation was moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. And unless the conditions were remedied, the commission warned the country faced a system of apartheid in its major cities. If you could close us out on just your thoughts, because that says it all.
None of these issues, social issues, were corrected. They are worse than they were during the time frame that this report was written. Um, yes, we do have a serious problem, and they know it's a problem, but they have a plan for it. They figured if we blow up, we'll roll the tanks. That's their solution to everything. That's why all of our police departments have military weaponry. All of the old, they being trained by the military. Israel is training many of the police officers now. They're also taking all of their old military weapons and giving it to the police department. It is illegal and unconstitutional in America for them to call the military into a domestic conflict. But if they give the police officers military weapons, that's the loophole. So even though they have military weapons, technically they're not the military. But they can. You see what's happening when they riot. They're coming out. They have everything but rocket launchers. They have all of these. Riot. They look like they're going to war. And you're supposed to be in a country that's supposed to protect and serve the citizen, but they're letting you know we're not citizens. That's why they handle their people who are upset differently than they handle black people. When white people have a confrontation with the police, they're treated like citizens. When we have a confrontation and we can be justified, they're still looking at us as the enemy because they've always viewed us as the enemy. So we can sit around and pretend like it's something different, but just look at how we're treated. Anybody can, what they say, it's what you do. It's not what you say, it's what you do. So if there's two different confrontations and I'm looking at how you're treating the white people and how you're treating me, then that lets me know what you think about me. They coming out with riot gear. They coming out with all kind. They're not even having. They might have rubber bullets, but they also are firing tear gas at people. They had to figure out how to overcome the tear gas, and this is something that they were angry about. It was legitimate concern. They actually killed the man in the street. They choked him to death in front of the cameras. When white people come and show up with guns, they are handled with kid gloves because they're the citizen and we're the captive of the citizen. Once we understand that we're the captive of the citizen, it'll be easier for us to decide to leave. As long as we are convinced that they put in a couple of black people here and there, they could put a couple of brown people in their cabinets here and there, that we're going to get justice. A black person can implement white supremacy just as easily as a white person can implement white supremacy because we went to their schools, we learned their way of thinking, and the only way you overcome is if you rebel. Either you are a college educated person who decided to reject white supremacy, or you've accepted it. If they're putting them in positions of authority, they've accepted white supremacy. They're not going to put somebody in charge who's going to do the opposite of what master wants.
Thank you, Sister Loray. I know it's been a while. We've been trying to schedule this for a while, but we finally did it, and I'm so happy that we did.
Praise.
Um, Once again, I'm here with Sister Loray Muhammad. Her powerful book, Integration: A Failed Social Experiment, and we know that they call it the projects, a projects an experiment as well. So with that, sister, I want to thank you for coming on, and we look forward to, God willing, having you on in some future shows as well. You know, maybe to just break down a certain aspect of the book and go into it in depth. I know we covered a lot in the book, and I would suggest to everyone who's watching to get this book. It's very powerful. And any closing remarks, sister, before we close out?
I just want to say, if you want to overcome Stockholm Syndrome, do everything the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has written. Listen to every tape you can get on from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It will wake you up like coffee. Because I would not be who I am if it wasn't for a man from Georgia who I never met. And I'm so grateful that he left something for me to read, to turn my light on, because I was going to school and I was always a very good student. And if it wasn't for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I would be a cog in the wheel of a system that is destroying my people. Instead, I'm the opposition.
Praise be to Allah. Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone for tuning in and watching. And as we close out, I want to just look at some of the things that we talked about real quick. We talked about voting in politics. And, you know, when we see that, we see one of the most powerful men in America, Obama, and how he was disrespected. So that didn't work. We look at education and employment, and we're still the last hired and the first fired, and we're underpaid and overworked. That don't work. We look at going to war, and fighting on foreign lands for America, shedding our blood on foreign lands, and here in the United States in the Civil War, only to be lynched in our uniforms in certain situations. And brothers, how is that treatment of PTSD working with our military soldiers committing suicide at an egregious rate? Then we look at Christianity, where we were lynched and lynched in front of a burning cross. And then capitalism, where once again they're making hand over fist while we're languishing in the prison industrial complex. So brothers and sisters, the answer is clear. The answer is that we need, as the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, we need to unite, we need to pool our resources, we need to come together and do something for self. Like Will Allen, find a plot of land to start planting some food because a famine is coming. So with that, brothers and sisters, I mean, I could go on all night. It's much love on this end, and from the crew of the National Network View. And so I just want to close out and thank you for tuning in to NNV News. Please share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. Follow us on social media at NNV News, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, National Network View. This is Steve Muhammad with NNVnews.com.
Be a part of the force that powers truth in journalism. Your support helps to combat false media. Cash App NNV News.
Let's have a discussion. People have questions. They would like answers. Let's talk about the issues. Confront the things that may be difficult to address. The Black narrative.